Well, I would say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for coming to the very last Y&How of the 2023. Today, we have a topic that I'm really excited to hear about, which is Beyond Impossible, the environmental benefits of alternative proteins. And we have with us Renee Bell. The reason I had chosen this topic for November is that if many of you are foodies like me, I start thinking immediately in October about what we're going to make for Thanksgiving, and then come all the other feasting holidays. And there are many traditions that, and I hear about how many turkeys are always slaughtered. And then we know that after that, there's Hanukkah, and then Christmas, and then New Year's, and there's more food and more food. And people are stuck in certain traditions, and they don't always think out of the box. But I have more and more friends that are vegan and vegetarian, and I get stuck. I'm like, what do I do for a main dish? How do I move my plants from side dish to main dish? And I stress about this stuff. So I was thinking about this all the way back in June or July when I reached out to Renee, and I said, I'd love to have a presentation about alternative proteins and how we cook them and where they come from. How do you cook with them? Where are they in our marketplace? So I'm really excited about today's presentation. For those of you that are new, and I don't think there's anyone, we'll do this fast. Growing Climate Solutions is a regional climate initiative and has worked to develop a network of institutions and stakeholders that build climate awareness, look out to protect natural assets as this helps the climate debate or solutions. We try to empower people in Southwest Florida and really throughout Florida to support and engage on equitable climate solutions, equitable being an important piece of that. And when we feel we found a good solution, we want to bring visibility to it, because the more people that see that there are solutions out there, the more they engage with us. So we're very excited about that mission. The Y&How workshops were created about 2 years ago as we were getting feedback from the 900 people who subscribed to our newsletter. They were all interested in, what can I do with this information? Like, we would have things on larger topics. Hang on, I have a phone ringing. We would have all kinds of topics that were sort of big picture, political topics, topics that are international, and people would walk away and say, I'm fascinated, but what can I do with that? What can I do tomorrow to make a difference? So the Y&How workshops were created as a way to develop a presentation that the participants could walk away with some tips and ideas, something they can do tomorrow, change in their lifestyle, or a tweak, something they might consider. And we tried to make it as locally focused. So this is why we're covering the topic of food. As you all know, we're doing this in a meeting workshop format. So it's not a webinar. That means that if you don't mute your phone, we hear your dog barking and the doorbell ringing, or like me, the phone ringing. So if you want, just mute your speaker. You can even, if you want to have lunch, turn off your pictures. But after Renee is done with her presentation, everyone who's left, we're going to do a Q&A and put the pictures back on, and let's have a conversation about it. So with no further wait, I would like to introduce Miss Renee Bell from the Good Foods Institute, and she's a senior science communication specialist, and she helps the SCI tech team communicate compelling messages about alternative proteins. And she sort of does what I do. She hosts events like this to create awareness of this new technology and these new product offerings. The Good Foods Institute is a nonprofit think tank and an international organization working to accelerate innovation in the alternative protein space, whether that is plant-based proteins, cultivated meats, which we might hear about, or even fermentation. And Renee holds a bachelor's degree and a master's, an MBA from Rochester Institute of Technology. So she's super qualified and in this space. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Renee.
Great, thanks, Anna. I will share my screen so I can see. There we go. Hopefully you're all seeing that now. Excellent. Thanks, Anna and Growing Climate Solutions for having me today, and thanks for everyone who's here taking time out of your day for today's presentation. My name is Renee, and I work for the Good Food Institute. Instead of asking consumers to give up the foods they love, the Good Food Institute is working to accelerate the transition to alternative proteins by helping companies make products that are delicious, affordable, and accessible. And during today's presentation, I will introduce you to some of the problems that are inherent in our current food system, the 3 categories of alternative proteins that have the potential to create a more sustainable, secure, and just protein supply for our growing population. And finally, I'll tell you more about the Good Institute's work and our theory of change. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. As Anna described to me earlier this week, the focus of these Y&How seminars is what actions can we take as individuals that can minimize our impacts on the environment. And I think a lot of times when we think about that, we automatically go to thinking about wind and solar energy, electric cars, reducing, recycling, composting, water conservation, adjusting the thermostat depending on the season. And I think that many of us, myself included, for a grand majority of my life, we fail to realize that what we choose to put at the end of our forks can really also have a big impact on our environmental footprint on the planet. And you know what? I think when I shared my screen, I'm just going to stop share. I think if I share it again and click the little share sound, I forgot to do that. I'm going to do that because I have a short video that I'd like to share with you next, so that I think kind of summarizes GFI's outlook on food and climate. And this is less than a minute and a half, so it's quick.
Even if all fossil fuel emissions went away today, the only way we hit our global climate targets is by addressing food and agriculture.
Not seeing the video, Renee.
Today, agriculture.
Oh, you aren't?
No, we're seeing launch meeting. Is everybody on the call seeing the same thing?
Accounts.
Okay.
Even if all.
Well, I can send that in a follow-up email. It's just a quick video, and it's not comparative to the presentation. Are you seeing my screen now?
We're
seeing your browser, not PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Well, let me try that again. Sorry about that. Let's see. Let me just escape out of here and go back into slideshow mode, see if that fixes it.
Okay, we're back on your screen.
Okay. All right. So let's see if we can get the video to work this time.
There we go.
Even if all fossil fuel emissions went away today, the only way we hit our global climate targets is by addressing food and agriculture. Today, agriculture accounts for 1/3 of all global emissions. Animal agriculture alone, including the crops and pastures to feed those animals, accounts for 20% of all emissions. And if we keep producing meat in the same ways, those emissions will continue to grow. Global demand for meat is projected to double by 2050. A solution? Change how meat is made. Alternative proteins, meat made from plants or cultivated from animal cells, can deliver the same foods we love with an added bonus. They can slash emissions by up to 92%, especially when produced with renewable energy. If we want to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, reimagining meat is a key piece of that climate puzzle. Can you see it now? Let's solve it together.
All right, so thanks for bearing with me with the technical glitch, but that video gives you a glimpse into how our overall food system is impacting our environment. And now we'll just go into a bit more detail. So the key question that GFI is working to address is how will we feed 10 billion people by 2050? And how will we do that sustainably, efficiently, and safely? Industrial animal agriculture is responsible for a significant percentage of all the greenhouse gas emissions. It uses 75% of agricultural land, yet provides only 33% of the global protein supply. And it's also the #1 user of medically important antibiotics. So industrial animal agriculture sits at the intersection of the most pressing issues we face today: environmental devastation, global food insecurity, potentially the next global pandemic, and animal suffering. So let's take a closer look at the problems presented by the current methods of meat production. So first, let's consider land use. Looking at the total available land on the Earth's surface, 71% of which is habitable, half is devoted to agriculture. And the land devoted to agriculture, 77% of that is used for livestock, while only 23% grows crops. But we know that the majority of the calories and even the majority of the protein available for human consumption comes from plant-based food that from that 23% of cropland. So as the population increases, this starts to look unsustainable. We could be using more of that livestock purposed land to grow crops and drastically increase the amount of calories and protein that we have to feed people. So looking within the US specifically, we see a similar pattern. Livestock, that huge yellow square in the middle of the screen, takes up drastically more land than the smaller green rectangle to the right of that's labeled food we eat. Additionally, we're also using that tan area to the right of the livestock rectangle to grow the feed that sustains the livestock. We don't need to be doing this. We could increase the amount of land devoted to the food we eat by decreasing the amount of land devoted to livestock feed or cow pasturing, and feed many more people sustainably. We can even evaluate the land usage by the individual meal. This particular graph shows the amount of land needed to produce a typical meat dish eaten for lunch in square meters per person. And more than 3.5 square meters of land is needed to produce a single hamburger meal. And we can also take a look at water usage. It's also an area of concern. We can compare the water usage per kilocalorie or per gram of protein for plant-based and animal-based food items. Growing fruits and nuts is more water intensive per gram of protein than growing animal meat, but beans, also known as pulses, cereals, roots, and vegetables can provide the same amount of protein for less water, and the overall water footprint of beef, based on this production and consumption data, shows that beef production uses almost twice as much water as the next closest animal meat, and more than 5 times as much as the cultivation of pulses. And we're familiar with some of the other problems associated with animal agriculture. The UN has said that animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. And we can see some of those effects around us. On the left, we see waste runoff from factory farms and aquaculture. The middle image represents the land use devoted to crops that will feed animals raised for meat. And on the right is a representation of the clear cutting of forests to provide pasture and grazing land for beef cattle, eliminating biodiversity, affecting soil health and ecosystem health, and reducing air quality enhancements and carbon sinks provided by old growth forests. Unsurprisingly, our food choices also leave a carbon footprint. This graph was produced by the Environmental Working Group, the nation's largest environmental research and advocacy organization. And it shows that the more animal products we eat, the greater our carbon footprint. This graph shows how 4 ounces of food compares to miles driven. Fruits, vegetables, and beans have the lowest carbon footprint, while meat and especially beef have the highest. And one of the factors contributing to the higher carbon footprint of animal products is the need to feed animals. This is a major contributor to the inefficiency of our food system. Take the chicken, for example. The chicken has been relentlessly optimized for efficiency and is the most efficient of all land animals that we raise for food. However, despite all of these optimizations, at the end of the day, we're still faced with a fundamental thermodynamic inefficiency, where 9 calories in the form of soy, wheat, and legumes go into the chicken to produce a single calorie for human consumption. Instead of feeding the chicken these 9 calories, we could otherwise be using them to directly feed people in a more efficient way. And if you think that we could, engineer away the inefficiencies of the chicken, keep in mind that poultry sciences have already been breeding larger chickens to the point where today's chickens barely resemble the ones from the 50s or 70s. And many have breasts so large now and so heavy that they can't even stand up when they're fully grown. We can't make the chicken much more efficient because it needs to breathe, it needs to maintain its body temperature, move around, and grow all of the parts of its body that we don't end up eating or using otherwise, but which are essential for its ability to grow from an egg to a chicken. And despite the inefficiencies of this system, and despite growing awareness of land constraints due to expanded herds and growing more animals, meat production continues to increase primarily by factory farming, raising more animals with fewer resources, and thus the amount of meat produced continues to increase. And of course, the production of meat isn't in a vacuum. It's also driven by global demand. We know that as populations industrialize, they start to eat more Western diets, which means diets that are more meat heavy and that have meat included at more meals than before. Projections for meat demand show that we're expecting to eat a lot more meat by 2050, and particularly a lot more chicken. That meat will have to come from somewhere, though hopefully it doesn't have to come from the same system that we've historically used to produce it. And so finally, we'll take a moment to examine the public health implications of our current food system. Animals in the United States consume more than twice as many, that's like hard to wrap your brain around, medically important antibiotics as humans do. Livestock raised in concentration, in concentrated animal feeding operations are treated with antibiotics to prevent them from getting disease and to bolster their growth. However, the use of antibiotics in this way increases the risk of developing antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And antibiotic-resistant bacteria are among the gravest health threats that we face today. It's estimated that up to 162,000 people die per year in the US as a result of antibiotic-resistant infections, making it one of the leading causes of death in the US. And the UN warned in 2019 that if no action is taken, drug-resistant diseases could cause 10 million deaths each year by 2050 and damage the economy akin to the 2008 global financial crisis. And zoonotic diseases represent another pressing issue that's fueled by our current food production system. The UN Environment Program has identified 7 human-mediated factors as most likely to drive the emergence of zoonotic diseases that could lead to the next pandemic. And as you can see, the first 2 items on this list, increasing human demand for animal protein and unsustainable agricultural intensification, relate directly to what we eat and how our food is produced. To review, industrial animal agriculture sits at the intersection of the most pressing issues we face today. So now we have to ask, is there any way we can innovate ourselves out of this position? And we can make meat, but in a better way. So we can focus on the technological solutions to our outdated, inefficient system of animal agriculture. What is the solution to animal agriculture and our meat-heavy diets? How do we get the food system to shift to healthy, sustainable, humane foods? We can tell people to eat more plates of beans, greens, and grains, but this has been tried for many years with very little success. People do love meat. That is why the Good Food Institute is focused on the supply side of the alternative protein industry. Our theory of change is that if you develop alternatives to meat, eggs, and dairy, that are competitive in terms of taste, price, and availability, then the majority of consumers will shift to consuming those products. Now we'll review the 3 pillars of alternative proteins and how they can help us solve the problems posed by conventional methods of meat production. So at GFI, we see alternative proteins as fitting into 3 separate categories from a production, cost, and infrastructure perspective. We can make proteins directly from plants with fermentation technology or using animal cell culture. And we'll take a brief look at each of these 3 platforms. Plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy are produced directly from plants. Next-gen plant-based options look, taste, and cook like conventional meat and offer complex carbohydrates and fiber. Plant-based proteins can be sourced from a variety of plant sources and engineered in creative ways to mimic the structural and functional roles of animal-based proteins. And plant-based proteins exist across the spectrum. You're probably aware of this, that at the far end of the left of the screen here, we have our basics, whole plant foods such as beans, lentils, and mushrooms. And then there are plant proteins such as tempeh and tofu that are minimally processed and still retain many of the qualities of the plant foods they're made from. And then moving further right, there are veggie-centric plant-based meats such as a black bean quinoa burger. These products, although meant to be a substitute for meat, do not attempt to replicate it. And then at the far right of the spectrum, we have plant-based meats that are designed to replicate meat, like the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Sausage. These more recently developed products appeal to a wide range of people and not just people who don't include meat in their diet. And if we take a look at the competitive landscape for plant-based meat, this visual is just a basic summary. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea of how the landscape has been changing over the years. There are several even conventional meat companies who are entering the space, reframing themselves as protein companies, and they're launching a variety of plant-based products. So they're getting in on this new trend. And then also the field of challenger startups is exploding. There are waves of innovation coming down the pipeline, and there are hundreds of startup companies in the plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy industry that are launching on a regular basis. And this graphic just provides a small sampling of those companies. Moving on to the next category, this is alternative proteins made through fermentation. And although fermentation has been used to make food and beverages for millennia, everything from beer to kimchi, fermentation has recently emerged as a powerful technological platform for taking alternative protein products to the next level. Fermentation is an enabling technology for the alternative protein industry that allows the production of standalone protein sources or ingredients to enhance the functional or sensory attributes of products. Companies are currently using fermentation technology to produce ground meat products, whole cut meats, eggs, milk, cheese, gelatin, seafood, fats, oils, pet food, and more. So there's a lot of opportunity in the fermentation space. Fermentation is also enhancing plant-based products across all of these categories. And fermentation has basically 3 different ways of being used in the alternative protein industry. So there is traditional fermentation that has been used for thousands of years in items such as bread and beer. It uses intact live microorganisms to modulate processed plant-derived ingredients, resulting in products with unique flavor and nutritional profiles. The tempeh and soybeans are familiar examples. Then there is biomass fermentation, which leverages the fast growth and high protein content of many microorganisms to efficiently produce large quantities of protein. And the biomass serves as either predominantly an ingredient for a food product or several of primary ingredients in a blend of food products. There are also some exciting startups in this space, but kind of the leader in biomass fermentation is corn. You can find a lot of their products in the freezer of your local grocery store. And that's corn, sounds like corn on a cob, but it's corn with a Q. And then finally, precision fermentation is designed to use microbial hosts as cell factories for producing specific functional ingredients. There are companies that are currently working on egg white protein and some dairy proteins using this process. And if you are a cheese eater, you're eating rennet, which is an enzyme used in the cheese making process. Rennet is made through the process of precision fermentation in 90% of the cheeses that are out there on the market. Otherwise, it comes from the lining of cows' stomachs. So we found a better way to make rennet, thankfully, through precision fermentation. So then moving on to cultivated meat. So, as I just mentioned, that, we have all these plant-based and fermentation-derived products that will appeal to many people, but there will always be a segment of the population that wants to eat actual meat from animals. And this is where cultivated meat plays a critical role. And so what is cultivated meat? Cultivated meat is genuine animal meat that can replicate the sensory and nutritional profile of conventionally produced meat because it's comprised of the same cell types arranged in the same three-dimensional structure as animal muscle tissue. It looks and tastes the same, but it's arguably better because it's produced in a way that has many benefits, including improved efficiency. There's no need to cycle all those calories through an animal. There's less environmental impact, and there's a reduced need for industrial animal agriculture. So how is cultivated meat produced? This graph breaks it down, or graphic breaks it down for us. So the process is borrowed from the cell therapy industry, and you start with a small biopsy of cells from an animal. And when I say small, it's quite small, like the size of a grain of rice is all you need. So you take those cells, and those cells then multiply and divide, or proliferate in the scientific term, when they're in a bioreactor, which is like just a big stainless steel vat like you would see in a brewery. You put the cells in there along with cell culture media, and you keep it warm, and the cells grow. And then once the cells start growing and you have enough cells, you change the conditions to make the cells differentiate into muscle, fat, or connective tissue. The process from start to finish only takes around 6 to 8 weeks, and it's far faster than raising an animal from a baby to its time when it's large enough to go to slaughter. And just like plant-based and fermentation, there are many opportunities for innovation in this space, especially when it comes to the cell culture media, the scaffolding that the cells grow on, and the bioprocess design. A lot of our scientists on the team I work on are working on some of those challenges. So the cultivated meat industry really got its start in 2013, or at least it's kind of like public face start in 2013 when Dr. Mark Post unveiled the world's first cultivated burger. It was very expensive. Thankfully, costs have been coming down year by year. The cultivated meat industry has been busy producing a wide range of products, and you can see here that there's been different prototypes rolled out from different companies. The cultivated meat was first approved for sale in Singapore in the year 2020, and more recently, it was approved for sale in the United States in June of this year. You can experience Upside Foods chicken at Bar Kren in San Francisco, and Chef Jose Andres is serving Good Meats products at one of his restaurants in Washington, D.C. So it is a limited release in the United States, but it is available for sale. So what does the cultivated meat landscape currently look like? This slide is a bit outdated now, but it gives you an idea of how the industry is growing. At the end of 2020, there were about 75 startups entirely dedicated to creating cultivated meat inputs or end products. And these companies are working on all aspects of the cultivated meat value chain. About 25% of them are B2B companies working exclusively on technologies to help the industry. And companies are developing every conceivable species of animal meat in all sorts of different cuts. So as mentioned, Good Meat and Upside Foods are the only cultivated meat companies with products available in the US right now. However, it is expected that additional companies will be selling their products in the near future. And we can also consider the environmental impact of cultivated meat. Recent data from a life cycle assessment indicates that the production of cultivated meat at scale will have a significantly lower environmental footprint than conventional beef. This data was the first to be informed by companies involved in the cultivated meat supply chain and showed that a cultivated meat production facility using sustainable energy practices will use significantly fewer resources compared to the production of conventional beef. And overall, all three categories of alternative proteins are more sustainable than their conventional meat counterparts. So it really offers a way to enjoy products that that still meet the need for meat and the desire for meat, but doing so in a way that's more friendly to the environment. So ultimately, in the future, we won't see these three technologies as distinct segments, but rather as one large industry where we produce animal alternatives across a spectrum, utilizing ingredients from one or more technology. So some fully plant-based, some will be fully cultivated, and in the middle, we'll have a growing segment of hybrid products that pull from multiple technologies. So in recent years, we've made leaps and bounds in the alternative protein industry, and there's a wide array of new companies, delicious new products, and exciting advances in the science and technology that move us towards a more sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. And yet there remains much work still yet to be done. And that's where Good Food Institute comes in. Oh, there we go. So the Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit building a sustainable, secure, and just global food system. We use unique insight across the scientific, policy, industry, and investment landscapes to use the power of food and innovation in markets to accelerate the transition of the world's food system towards alternative protein. And in order to do this, our organization employs close to 200 staff around the globe within 3 key programmatic departments. I'm part of the science and technology team, where we analyze the industry, we fund research, we put out analyses on the client, like one of the analyses we released last week was about side stream utilization and how we can use side streams from like spent brewer's grain or corn stover, which is like the corn stalks that are left over after harvesting corn. Like what can we do with those? How can we use those products in a sustainable way and alternative proteins? So that's the type of work we do in the science and technology team. Our corporate engagement team builds relationships with the largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them bring alternative proteins to their product offerings. And they also work with entrepreneurs, startups, and investors. And then finally, our policy team advocates for fair regulation of plant-based and cultivated meat and lobbies the government for to provide investments in sustainable protein research and development. And GFI plays a unique role in the ecosystem because we're really committed to sharing knowledge freely. We don't charge for any of our reports or consultations with companies or entrepreneurs or scientists. We focus on the white space. We try to find the areas where there's too little information, too few people working, and we try to fill those gaps. And then we take a big picture perspective and try to analyze the industry and bring those insights to anyone who's working in the industry that could benefit from them. So what do you do to reduce your environmental impacts of your food choices? So the good news is that you don't have to completely give up meat and eggs and dairy and seafood in order to change your greenhouse gas footprint of your food choices. You can see here in this chart that you're looking at the different colors represent dairy, eggs, fish, meat, plant matter, sugar, and oil. So you can see the top line, the average diet, the gray represents meat. So that's a pretty big proportion of the 2,000 plus kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per person per year. If you eat the average standard American diet. If you go down the chart part way, you can see that giving up dairy but still eating meat still has a positive impact, or going vegetarian. So I think the takeaway message here is, like, whatever changes you make are going to decrease your greenhouse gas footprint of your diet. I've been primarily vegan for many years at this point, but the majority of my life I ate the standard American diet, and I certainly didn't like flip a switch and go vegan. I started by eliminating meat, and then I eliminated seafood, and then I was a vegetarian and ate a lot of dairy and eggs for a long time. And that just, it was a process. So when you think about ways that you can reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of your diet, maybe start with meatless Mondays, or there's a cookbook called VB6. So it stands for vegan before 6. So, you eat breakfast, lunch, and whatever snacks you eat before dinner, you just eliminate animal products from those meals, and then you eat whatever you want for dinner. So there are a lot of different ways you can play around with this and ease into it. You can experiment with some of the alternative protein products that I referred to earlier in the presentation. There are a lot of, options out there now. Some of them are better than others, but it's fun to try new and different things. So if you're interested in going deeper, you can sign up for GFI's newsletters at gfi.org/newsletters. We have a variety of different newsletters for different audiences. You can check out our variety of in-depth resources at gfi.org. Or you can be adventurous and try some of the alternative protein products that are available near you. I know sometimes grocery stores have them right alongside the meat products. Sometimes there's like a separate little refrigerated section for alternative proteins. Sometimes, I shop at a Wegmans. I know you don't have Wegmans in Southwest Florida, but we have like separate freezer and refrigerated cases kind of for the alternative proteins. So you'll have to, maybe during our discussion, we can figure out where Publix keeps available proteins at the grocery stores in your area. So I do have some discussion questions, but I can stop sharing my screen so we can see each other, and you can ask me questions. I'm happy to hear your thoughts and take your questions. So thank you so much for your attention.